Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be part 10, chapter 10, entitled Recovery is Nonlinear. The rest of the summer passes with routine that's strict despite being completely unenforced. Izuku wakes up in the morning, hydrates, stretches, and then goes for a run. He returns home to find Aizawa making breakfast, and there's food waiting for him on the table by the time he gets out of the shower. Then they sit in the living room on either side of the table, Aizawa on the floor or in the chair going over lessons for the day before passing Izuku his readings and his homework. After lunch, Izuku does his 5 timed quirk analyses and then spends an hour fleshing them out into full-page spreads in a notebook. Then they go to the beach, and Izuku uses Amahaki to clear away the trash until he's just this side of exhausted, and Aizawa or Hisashi, or both, have to shepherd him home. He plays with the cats until dinner, or watches videos online as he rapidly teaches himself JSL. Hisashi always has his hearing aids in when he comes over to visit, but not always when Aizawa and Izuku go to his place, and Izuku would rather just learn how to communicate with him than make Hisashi feel like he has to put them in. And the evenings go one of 2 ways. Either Izuku stays home and enjoys time with Auntie Kayama or Hisashi while Aizawa goes on patrol, or Aizawa drags him to a warehouse on the outskirts of town and starts to teach him how to round out his training menu with a myriad of gym equipment that he's accumulated over the years. But all too soon, summer comes to an end, and everyone has to fit UA back into their schedules. Izuku finds it strangely disappointing at first, but he gets over it quickly. The students from 2A take him to lunch every day, and Izuku loves that, being around kids who are older than him, but who also include him, who joke around with their friends, and they ruffle his hair and call him Izuku-kun, or our little Kohai. It's great. There is, however, something unsettlingly awful that starts building in his chest sometime around the beginning of October. He can't explain it. He doesn't try, can't put a name to it, but every moment of happiness is framed by something unreasonably dark. A sadness that he can't stare at for too long, or else risk bursting out into tears or worse. He thinks Kyumi-san notices, but Izuku denies everything and says he's fine when she ventures questions toward his mood. He wants to figure this out on his own. Alone in his room one night, he reaches out to Amahaki. "Is this you?" he asked, feeling around the edges of his mind for what has now become a familiar presence of overwhelming emotion and a slideshow of images too fast to keep track of. The answer is no, but it's hesitant, not the whole truth. "You know what it is, though." Izuku isn't kind when he accuses Amahaki of keeping secrets from him. They're sharing a body, and at the very least, the god could, well, that's not really fair. Amahaki is already doing everything in its power to not simply eviscerate Izuku from the inside out. Keeping secrets is not really a big deal in the scope of things. Doesn't mean it's not annoying, though. The push of Amahaki in his head is different, like it's desperately trying to explain something but can't, like words would be needed or some deeper meaning of humanity that the god just doesn't have at the moment. So Izuku decides to ask easier questions. "Is it something that actually happened?" "Yes." "Okay, so it's not just Izuku's brain deciding that too much of a good thing, home, parents, good food, friends, is a bad thing. Nor would it be a nightmare or something similar." "Is it something I did?" "No." Also good. Probably means that Izuku isn't repressing being a dick to someone or killing people before the night of his escape. "How long ago?" This takes longer. A quantitative answer harder to produce through a communication format that's so limited despite how vast Amahaki's knowledge is. However, enough time around Izuku will teach the god how to speak properly, but he does eventually get a response. 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, and more recently. At first, it feels like an uncertain answer, but then Izuku realizes that whatever this is has happened repeatedly. So, he'd been 7 the first time. Or, well, 8 since he had turned 13 during his self-proclaimed birthday in June. He tries to think back on what life had been like 3, 4, or 5 years ago. Painful and awful. Amahaki not yet fully formed inside of him. Any power that was forced out of Izuku was wild and unwieldy. He tries to remember if there were any other kids left. Just one by the 3-year mark. 17. A boy who had been older by several years, older than Izuku is now. They were the last 2. 10 had disappeared the year before, after she tried to choke Izuku to death in the middle of dinner. But nothing else. He has scars from those years, the surgeries for taking pieces of Amahaki, the pain points for triggering Izuku's power when he wanted nothing more than to keep it inside of himself. But he has scars from every year in the facility. Whatever this is that's haunting him now doesn't have to do with any of the pale lines marring his freckled skin. Izuku falls back on his bed and stares up at the ceiling. It's late already, late enough that even Aizawa's probably asleep by now, or at least trying his best despite the insomnia working against him. In the darkness, Izuku brings his hand up and looks at the mark on his palm, tracing the harsh lines with his eyes. He sees the mark, usually black, currently red, so many times now that he can draw it from memory. He never has, doesn't want to leave a paper trail of any sort, but it's still unerringly familiar to him. He never thought, during all his years at the facility, that Amahaki would be so easy to use that he doesn't have to think twice about taking off the bandages anymore, let alone that he finds an odd sort of comfort communicating with the god, even if it's often headache-inducing as he pulls meaning from images he can't properly see. Hopefully someday, Amahaki will get better at talking in Izuku's head. "What the fuck am I missing?" he asked. The universe, maybe, or just Amahaki, barely outside of the reach is the answer, but it's hiding behind the cinch in his chest and the ache that he gets lately whenever the 2A table bursts into laughter at lunch. It's uncomfortable, and it's awful, and it makes him so fucking sad all the time, when all he wants to be is happy. Have I ever felt like this before? It's the last question that he gets out before exhaustion finally bites him in the ass, pulling at his shoulders and his knees and the back of his mind like weights falling into the calm waters at the beach. Knowing he can't fall asleep with his palm uncovered, though he did it all the time at the facility because back then he didn't care if something bad happened while he slept, but he does care now. He grabs the bandage from beside him on the bed and begins to wrap his palm. He's far too tired and covers his palm far too quickly to register the swell of emotions inside of him, emotions that are distinctly not his own. It gives him an answer right before he falls asleep. Yes. It all comes to a head 2 days later on a Friday night, halfway through Izuku's designated time in the warehouse gym that Aizawa keeps. He's trying to do handstands, has been trying to do handstands for the last 25 minutes to absolutely no avail. The next time he loses his balance and lands on his knees, barely catching himself from falling flat on his face for the 3rd time today, anger and disappointment rips out of him like blood from an open wound. Fuck! God, fucking stupid motherfucker! Fuck! He slams a fist into the mat beneath him, chest heaving as he clamors to get his breath back, struggles to fight down the frustrated tears choking at the back of his throat like a soot-swollen chimney. He's done so fucking well, stomping this feeling down all week, only to have it swell up under him because of some stupid handstands. From across the room, Aizawa's voice calls. "Are the second years teaching you to swear, because I know I've never been that vulgar in front of you?" Izuku shoots him a withering look from under his bangs, and there's a darkness that swells up then, right at the edge of his vision, reaching out with cloying black tendrils, and promising a sweet sink into a panic attack if only he would fucking give in. He wants to lash out, at Aizawa, at himself, at whatever the hell memory is haunting him with so bad that it stopped him from sleeping last night. He's tiptoeing along his breaking point, and he knows that with the same certainty that he knows he won't be able to put himself back together if he shatters. Maybe Aizawa knows it too, because for the first time since they arrived, he pushes away from the wall and walks forward. "All right. It's enough handstands for today, then. Come on, I want to." Aizawa freezes, hand out between them clearly just to offer Izuku help to his feet, but Izuku... Instinct. Raw, painful, hard-earned, not fucking tied to anything tangible instinct. Makes Izuku flinch so hard his whole body moves. He pushes himself back onto his hip in an instant, arms up to protect himself before he even registers moving. Aizawa stays stock still, for the full 30 seconds it takes before Izuku's able to look up at him and actually register what happened. That this is his dad. That he's not in trouble for failing. Not about to be. His brain cuts off, the thought falling straight into the empty void of lost time, and something traumatic and a repetition of pain and anger that Izuku knows to run from but doesn't know what he's running from. Tears well up and spill out of Izuku's eyes before he can blink them away. "I'm sorry." A sob rips its way out of his mouth. "I don't know what's wrong with me." His voice is nearly gone, sucked away by the panic attack, waiting for him with open arms, but he somehow manages to rasp the words out anyway. "I don't know how to stop." Slowly making his movements exaggerated and easy to follow, Aizawa lowers his hand to his side and kneels on the mat. There's more than a meter between them, and neither of them makes a move to close it. Izuku needs space, and Aizawa's going to give it to him. "It's okay. I know you don't mean it," Aizawa says, voice as gentle as Izuku's ever heard it. His eyes flick over Izuku's face, or at least the parts that aren't still covered by his arms, searching for something. "If you knew what was wrong, I think you would have told someone by now." He had definitely noticed then. Izuku's not sure why he's surprised by that, actually, now that he's confronted with it. And Aizawa notices everything about Izuku, from his dislikes of black tea, which he's never voiced, to his favorite color, a very specific teal seen in the sky after sundown that is now the color of all of his new notebooks, to the way that he likes routine in the things he does, but not in the way that he thinks. Izuku had thought his fake smile had been convincing enough to keep the creeping sadness from leaking into Aizawa's awareness, but apparently not. It's as relieving as it is uncomfortable being so known. I don't remember. Izuku chokes out, fist clutching at his hair, his whole body's curled up, defensive in something close to the fetal position, but still braced to move away if needed. He feels hands on him that aren't there. His eyes are open, and he can see that no one's touching him, but there's a tight hand pulling at his forearm and another pushing at his knee as if to try to pry him open into a more vulnerable position. A low whine slips out past his lips. He wants so badly to crawl into Aizawa's lap and be held until he's calm, but if those hands become any more real, he's going to scream. I don't remember, he repeats. But I know it's bad. Something bad happened, but I don't remember, and I feel like I'm choking on it, and I can't fucking breathe. Izuku. Aizawa cuts him off, the concern in his voice welling up for a moment, before receding like the tide, back into something far more calm and gentle. Izuku, look at me. But Izuku very much cannot do that, so after a moment of no response, Aizawa sighs and shifts into a more comfortable position on the mat. Izuku tries really hard not to flinch at the movement in his periphery, but he doesn't succeed. First of all, Aizawa says, setting his hands in his lap, you're not in trouble. I know, Izuku says, raspy and winded and not at all sounding like he believes it. He does know, logically, that he's not in trouble, that he hasn't done anything wrong, but emotionally, he's not so sure. Second of all, Aizawa continues as if he hadn't even interrupted. Healing is not linear. It's not some failure on your part that you've been having a bad week, nor should it be your responsibility to shoulder all of that. It's why you're still seeing Kiyumi-san every Thursday, and you know you can talk to Hizashi and me about anything. Izuku winces guilty. I know. So why didn't you? Not accusatory, just a question. Those invisible hands are still on him, too large and too strong to be real. Izuku pulls at his hair. Maybe if he hurts himself enough, clarity will come to him. Maybe if he manages to recreate whatever pain his mind is hiding from, he'll be forced to remember. I don't know, he says, voice straining. How do I talk about something I can't remember? Do you want to remember? That question finally gets Izuku to look at Aizawa again. His breathing is too quick. His face is wet and gross from crying, and his throat is so clamped shut that it's hard to swallow, but he looks and meets Aizawa's gaze, and soaks in his features, reminding himself over and over that he's okay, that he's somewhere safe, that he's with someone safe. Slowly he shakes his head. No, he really doesn't want to remember. Aizawa nods, understanding Izuku like he always does. Then, and I know I don't set a great example of this, but just talk about what you're feeling. Tell us, me, Hizashi, Kiyumi-san, hell, even Nezu would be fine, that you're upset, and you don't know why. We're not going to be mad at you or disappointed in you because you don't know why you're sad. Izuku has to look away again. The amount of earnest affection in Aizawa's voice is too much, too fast. No matter how badly he wants to sit in it and let it wash away all the sadness, he's still learning to accept this, learning to live with love so bountiful it soaks into his bones. You're right, he says after a moment. You're not a great example for that. Aizawa laughs, low and mirthful, and it fills Izuku's chest with warmth, chasing away some of the darkness. Are you okay? He asks after a moment, tone gone soft again. No, not yet. That's all right. Aizawa settles back on his hands, with his legs folded in front of him. Let me know when you are. And that's kind of not a fair thing to request, in Izuku's opinion, because he doesn't think he's going to be okay tonight, or tomorrow, or maybe even the day after that, but the longer he sits on the mat, arms slowly relaxing from their defensive position, phantom hands fading into the void of memories he doesn't want to look at, he realizes that being okay isn't definitive. He can be sad and still be okay. He can be raw from the come down of a panic attack and still be okay. What Aizawa's looking for isn't perfection, isn't for Izuku to freak out and finally say something and then be magically better. He's giving Izuku a moment to calm down, and when he's calm, he's offering Izuku an out and a steady pillar to lean against. He has no idea how much time has passed before he finally is able to unwind completely, arms down to his sides, legs folded on the mat instead of drawn up to his chest, He feels empty, like he does sometimes when he walks out of Kiyumi-san's office, like he's gone through too many emotions and doesn't know how to structure himself around the weight that's suddenly been taken off of his shoulders. And when he's ready, he lifts his eyes back to Aizawa, who's still watching him out of the corner of his eye. "I want to continue," Izuku says. He's not ready to go home just yet. Aizawa stares at him for a long moment, weighing something in his mind, probably the pros and cons of letting Izuku get back to exercising versus telling him to pack it up and go home. In the end, he nods and gets to his feet. And Izuku mirrors the motion quickly. "All right, 30 more minutes and then we need to get home. No more handstands tonight. Go through everything else in the menu, 10 reps of each." Izuku does as he's instructed, going through the motions of training that's been demonstrated and drilled into him for months now. 10 repetitions is nothing these days. Doesn't make his slowly forming lithe muscles burn. Doesn't make him lose his breath. But Aizawa still tosses him his water bottle afterwards and tells him to go through his cool-down stretches, watching him carefully so that he doesn't overexert himself or skip a step. They're out of the warehouse. Aizawa's looking up when Izuku finally speaks again. "Dad?" It's not weird calling him that anymore. He doesn't do it all the time, and it's not really how he addresses Aizawa in his head either, but there's a difference, for Izuku at least, between the title he gives someone in his head and how he feels about them. Aizawa is Aizawa, first and foremost, the majority of the time. The man who rescued him off the street, and the pro who had carved out time and space in his extremely busy life to raise a kid who would never survive the system. The teacher who trains Izuku to use a deadly power so that he doesn't get himself killed. But he's also Izuku's dad. The man who makes him breakfast at an hour far earlier than he would wake up if it was him left to his own devices. The man who bought him clothes and gave him a key to his own room so that he knows that everything in there is Izuku's and Izuku's alone. The man who holds him when he cries and talks him through panic attacks because he cares. Aizawa just looks at him, eyebrows raised up to his bangs, waiting for Izuku to continue. "I'm sorry I'm like this. I wish I was different. Thank you for looking after me. I wouldn't be alive if you weren't here. I'd be back in the facility or blown to pieces by my own stupidity. And this time bomb under my skin, I know this is hard on you. I'm sorry for being such a mess and for making you worry. Thank you for loving me anyways." "Thank you," is what Izuku eventually says, after chewing on the stream of consciousness he'd like to say and boiling it down to what's necessary. "I'm still not okay, but I'm better." Aizawa smiles, and it's just a tiny tilt of his mouth, but it shows heavily in the creases around his eyes. "I'm glad." This is usually where he would reach out and ruffle Izuku's hair or pull him into a one-armed hug, but instead he keeps his hands in his pockets and starts walking off down the street. Izuku trots after him until they're side by side, and the space between them is comfortable and warm. He forgets about the sadness, forgets about the phantom hands trying to pry him open, forgets about the rough taste of a panic attack on his tongue. None of that is here right now. It's just the quiet sounds of the neighborhood at night. Cars in the distance, people laughing through open windows, a dog barking down a side street. Izuku tilts his head back and simply listens, and when he reaches out to twist his fingers in a dark, baggy sleeve, Aizawa doesn't say anything about it. All right, everyone, this concludes Chapter 10 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 11 will be next, which will continue into Part 2 of this fic. The author split this up into 3 separate parts, and there's a single chapter epilogue at the end. So this will be the conclusion of Part 1 of this fic, and then Part 2 will start up with Chapter 11. Hope you all are still enjoying it. As always, thank you so much for listening.